Should be on. Can you hear me?
The audio is not very great. I can hear you, but it's not very clear.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Try that. Does that
That
sound better?
sounded better.
Okay.
That's better.
I changed to those mics over there.
It's loud and clear now. Thank you.
What am I supposed to be doing? No, WebEx.
No, you should have gotten a new one from Teams. It says it's calling you right now.
On Teams. So my Teams is acting like it hasn't. Maybe that's what Oh, okay. But now it's like, oh,
Yep, join that one.
is that wrong?
You don't need to do any audio.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
For the guest Wi-Fi. Thanks for accepting our consent.
Okay, now I'm gonna get Let's see. I see Rakesh. Rakesh, can you hear me? Yes.
Really
Yes,
well?
loud and clear.
Loud and clear. Okay. That might be the way to do it.
Can you hear Ben? Or are we just gonna be
I can share with you.
I'll probably project.
in the AG? Okay.
Yeah.
There is
All
a
right.
little.
Got it.
I think because the, yeah. It's
We might need to do.
We
It's
should.
another
Oh,
time.
well, you wanna even-
It's the- use the mic.
Energy tries to- Oh, great. I made a bunch of the links, so. Yeah, there are several. I just can't share.
For Mary, you've been doing some talking.
It's a pretty special.
Who's
I'm
on
gonna
YouTube?
mute you. Okay.
And
Okay.
let's see. Yep. Okay. We got the screen. We're good. And I will start sharing on the WebEx. It is? Okay, let's see what we can do. That's the mic. Okay, try that now. Can you hear Edith?
No, we can't hear Edith.
No. Josh, your voice is coming across. If loud and clear, but the others in the room I cannot hear.
Okay, we will have Edith and maybe Ben move closer to these speakers.
So Rakesh, how do I sound if I'm projecting?
All right, how about this? I'm here.
Yeah, it's not great.
Okay, but
Try that.
let me just sit and see what happens. Okay, how about that? Is that better?
Slightly better. Not great.
Try one more. Try that one.
Okay, how about this? I can also speak more loudly and pretend it's a larger room.
That's better.
This
Yeah,
is
talk
good.
Louder.
I'll use my stage voice.
There you go.
To be a lot. Loud to me, but-
So too loud.
Well, should we get going? We stuck to any other person? Even if we are.
That sounds coming from where, so I wonder if you and Mary should swap.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I know, I think this.
Let's just keep moving Edith until we find the perfect sound.
This is the opposite of virtual meetings where I just sit and stare at my screen. That would be-
Guess you're getting your sit-ups in.
I'll just do this.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Okay. All right, so we want to pull up our slides. There'll be on this giant screen behind you, so you do not need to have a supplemental screen. So welcome, everyone. It's great to be back in person. Really appreciate the folks that have either drove down the street or made the trek here to the state office building for our advisory group meeting. We do a little bit of, well, actually, if I'm just gonna pass it to you to do some opening, and then we'll do some housekeeping. Does that work?
Yeah, that sounds great. So thanks everybody for coming. Really appreciate everybody who came in person. I know it's hard and I also think it's really important. So just really appreciate you coming today. So today's meeting, I don't know if we can jump to the objective slide. I think it would be helpful just to have it up, particularly for folks online. And for everybody online, also really appreciate you joining. And I'm sorry that you couldn't be here in person. We miss you all and we hope you can come next time. And we have kind of we want it today to be an active day. So you see some stickies on the walls. We have a virtual whiteboard where we'll also be getting views from people online. So we're trying to make sure that we're including everybody. The goal, there's kind of two parts to today's meeting. The first is an update. So it's kind of to inform you on where we are in the process and the discussions in the working group discussions that we've been carrying out. We also on the 9th, on April 9th, had a webinar on the results of some of the complementary analysis that we've been conducting. So I'm gonna just show some of the highlights from that energy wallet and air quality modeling that was done. And then we'll have a little bit of room for discussion. So that's kind of a traditional format for the first part of our meeting. And then we really want to move to where we are in our thinking in terms of policy recommendations. The bill asks Odo to develop recommendations, and we've gotten to the point where we wanted to bring you, as many of you into the room as possible so that we could have that discussion in person and around a table. And so we're going to make that part more interactive to try to really get your ideas and your reflections and iterate on what we're going to present a starting point for the discussion. So that's essentially it. And we have worked out a way. We have online, we have Jillian Demedio and Rob Delmar, who are gonna kind of run the online whiteboards, and we'll get to that later in the meeting, but just to let you all know that's kind of who's there. Jessica here is in the room I was joking that she's our medium, so she's bringing the kind of ethereal virtual space into the room and making sure that we're connecting up when we get into the discussion.
Well, thank you. We jumped ahead a little bit, so now we're gonna go
Yeah.
backwards. That's my attempt at going backwards. So just as a reminder, just from the mission and work of Department of Energy, hopefully this seems familiar. We won't spend time on it, but just grounded in our shared purpose as we spend our time together. Go next slide. And then for the folks online, I can't see, it's behind me. Hopefully folks are relatively familiar with WebEx. As a reminder, and I appreciate the folks already on camera, creating a sense of community, just though you're not kind of physically in the room. But as a reminder, at the bottom of your screen, you can mute and unmute. There's a raise hand button to get in the queue. As you'll see, you can see my face. I'll also be trying to track our online queue live real time. We do have a chat that Jessica will be monitoring and helping me. So if there are questions or comments in the chat, that'll be helpful. So hopefully WebEx feels familiar, and feel free to put some questions in the chat if you're having any technical difficulties. And then Edith already names our meeting objectives for today, so I won't kind of go through that again, but we'll walk through our agenda, if we go to the next slide, around how we're gonna kind of align with those objectives. So we'll do our introductions here in a moment. As we always do, we'll affirm our meeting summary from our previous conversation. You'll get an update on the energy strategy process. So there's been a number of working group meetings and activity that's been happening. Energy Wallet, I don't know if folks were able to see the webinar on the Energy Wallet, but we'll kind of give a high-level summary of that content and then kind of preview what's coming up next. The majority of our meeting today will be in the last couple hours, which will really be kind of building off what Edith was saying in meeting objectives, really discussion of kind of the framing of policy and some kind of initial contributions from you all. We'll have an exercise. You can see the stuff on the wall. We're going to get you up. We're going to get you active and really try to kind of put some ideas on the table, give you some spaces to agree, disagree, dialogue, and really create a space for some real discussion today around some of the policy framing and pathways. And we'll go more into that when we get there. We will have a break, finalize our conversation, and we'll get you out of here. Gosh, see you now. So folks, just as a matter of being in person, of course, this applies to folks online as well. Just, there's coffee, pastries, maybe water. There's water in the building, I know that. But just take care of yourself. Obviously, we're here for several hours. Feel free to get up, walk around, just make yourself comfortable as we spend our time together. Any questions on the agenda? I'm seeing any. I'll spend just a little bit of time on our group agreements. I think we're kind of pivoting into a part of our process where these will become more and more important. And obviously, we've had some great conversations in this room. You all have aligned with these agreements previously, but I'll just spend a moment kind of walking through them, particularly as we get into these policy conversations where your kind of interest-based perspectives are going to show up more and more. As we start actually putting some meat on the bone, as they say, and some words on the page. So last, for our agenda, we really try to craft our agendas with great intention. So kind of honoring, participating, acting in good faith, really, and there'll be opportunities for this today to really learn and listen and try to understand each other's perspectives. And as we get into some of the exercises later this afternoon, later this morning, we'll have a chance to see kind of what your colleagues around the table are putting up in terms of ideas, where folks are seeing strengths, weaknesses, concerns, concepts, and ideas. We actively want you all to be talking to each other, seeking that understanding as we continue this process. And we want you to do so in respectful, candid, and constructive ways. And we'll continue to use, I'll use that word over and over again, being productive and constructive. Right? How are we, if we're disagreeing, how are we doing so in a way that helps move us forward? When we are agreeing, how do we see that as an opportunity to share that agreement and to constructively move forward? We want you to be open-minded, recognizing, each of you brings a perspective, brings your own kind of interest-based perspectives into the room, but being open to others' experiences. Right? It's kind of a theme of trying to listen and learn from each other. Ask questions, be curious, try to understand the why, whether that's from the Department of Energy or any Department of Energy, or whether that's from your peers and colleagues around the table. Being accountable, of course, to all these agreements, but really trying to bring things early, to be open, to be honest, to put things in the room. And the value of bringing such great wisdom around the table is often reliant on your willingness to kind of put your ideas, put your perspectives, put your hopes, put your aspirations into the space, and we'll do what we will with it. To respect each other and different opinions. And then we have lots of opportunities, and starting today and continuing through the rest of this process to resolve difference, to find common ground. Again, as an advisory group, one of your greatest powers is where you can find alignment and give kind of a shared message to Oregon Department of Energy as we move through this process. Share space, part of my job, but I'll ask you all, if you're consistently the first person to raise your hand, talking too much, I might ask you to step back. Certainly, if you're someone who's sitting back and not contributing, I'm gonna push you, and we'll create some space, very intentional, so we can hear from every voice in the room. Particularly online, obviously, using the chat with some level of consideration. For the folks in the room, we don't do this very often. Just remember, it's distracting. You have folks online trying to listen. Whispers can sound really loud in a room like this. So, eliminating side chat. If you need to really have some one-on-one conversation, step out of the room and have that conversation. I give a thumbs up that we're good with these agreements. We hold each other and ourselves accountable. Okay. Double thumbs up. All right. Okay, we can go to the next one. So let's do some introductions. I'm going to just kind of roll around the room and then we'll go online. Hopefully folks remember, a lot of that with the Kearns and West third-party facilitator. Richie.
Hi, everyone. Ruchi Spear, Associate Director for Strategic Engagement at Oregon Department of Energy. I was listening on the phone for the 15 minutes on the way here. You guys figured out the sound.
Stuff, number one. Yeah.
Mary Kyle McCurdy, Associate Director and Staff Attorney at 1000 Friends Board.
Jennifer Hillhart, Policy Program Director of the Oregon Citizens Utility Board.
Karen Childs, Executive Director of the Rural Hiking Alliance. Mary Moreland, Director of Environmental Policy and Corporate Responsibility at Northwest Natural.
Scott Sims, CEO and Executive Director of the Public Power Council.
Fred Hewitt, Northwest Energy Coalition.
Lauren Lake, the Nature Conservancy. I think probably a lot of people knew Laura Tabor, who was my colleague, but she moved on from TNC. So I'll let her get up to speed.
You are welcome.
Yeah.
Elaine Krause, Energy Trust of Oregon.
Josh Price, Project Manager for ODIM.
Edith Bayer.
Cassandra Jackson, I'm with the Port of Portland, stepping in for Jen Buse, our Environmental Director.
Joshua Bassovin with Climate Solutions.
Emily Griffiths with Renewable Northwest.
Jimmy Lindsay with Portland General Electric.
I'm Charity Thane, Executive Director at Community Energy Project. Rebecca Smith, Renewable Hydrogen Alliance.
Mr. Rikers, Oregon Department of Energy.
Thank you. Let's go, and I'll just ask for our Odo colleagues, we'll have some space to introduce yourself, folks, remind folks. Anyone who chats, if I don't call on you, or contributes, I'll just ask you to introduce yourself if you haven't already. Let's go online, Alan.
Yeah, hi, I'm Alan Zelenka. I'm the Assistant Director for Oregon Department of Energy for Planning Innovation and all the fun stuff at ODO, climate change, planning, renewables, energy efficiency.
Chris Golightly.
Good morning, Chris Golightly with the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, and apologies that I can't be in person. I do have a commission meeting today, and I'll have to step away for a few minutes at 10 to present to that.
Thank you, Chris. Corey.
Good morning. Corey Scott, Pacific Power. I also apologize for not being there in person. I wish I could be, and also have a couple of conflicts, so I'll be on and off a little today.
Lori, Ivy.
Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Ivy with QB Fabrication and Welding. I also apologize I can't be in person. I have some pretty intense deadline projects coming on my end here, but I wish I was there with you guys. Thanks for having me here with you guys.
Jason.
Assuming I'm the only Jason, this is Jason Huser, the Public Policy and Government Relations Director for the Eugene Water and Electric Board, a municipal electric utility, and I'm standing in as an alternate for Aaron Orlowski today.
Thanks, Jason. And you are the only Jason. Congratulations. Nate?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Nate Hill, Head of Energy Policy at Amazon. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Patrick?
Morning, everybody. Patrick Mills, Umatilla Tribes.
Thank you. Rakesh?
Good morning, Rakesh Aneja, Head of E-Mobility at Daimler Truck North America. My apologies as well for not being there in person. Thank you.
Robert? Robert Wallace?
Wallace with White Star C&D up near the morning.
You're very quiet, Robert. You want to try again and use your voice?
Yeah, Robert Wallace with White East RC&D calling from the Dalles, Oregon.
We'll have to, so all just have to be very quiet. And folks are online. Shannon?
Hi there, Shannon Souza, Soul Coast Consulting and Design, and I'm representing Oregon Solar and Storage Industry Association today. Coming from the very ragged edges of our energy infrastructure, I'm working down in Coos Curry Electric, so sorry I couldn't join you.
I get engines on that description. Tucker?
Tucker Bellman, the Director of Government Relations for the Oregon Rural Electric Cooperative Association. Coos Curry is actually one of our members, and we're proud to have him. Thank you. I have to be down in Salem today for legislative session stuff. We're still obviously very busy down there, so that's why I'm not with you in person. But I will be participating as much as I can up until then.
Wow, it's like this is not the only thing that people have going on. You're well. Let me come back, Jillian and Rob Delar. Because you all will be working with the online group. Jillian, say hello.
Yeah, good morning, folks. Jillian DeMedio. I'm a senior policy analyst at Odo and the transportation lead for the Oregon Energy Strategy.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, good morning. Rob Delmar, also a senior policy analyst and lead for the Building Efficiency, Electrification, Distributed Energy Resources Policy Group.
And then I think we got everybody online. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you.
Want to say hello? Who are you?
Sure, I'm Jeff Hammerlin, the latecomer here. I'm just a senior. Oh, about to turn 75, so I'm full-time senior today. We're leaving in a week for Istanbul, which just had an earthquake. So I was dealing with that this morning. And so anyway, here I am, and I'm a retired professor at Portland State University, also still a senior fellow there. We have an energy certificate program, and I'm trying desperately to keep alive, given the $18 million budget cuts that Portland State University is facing. I think the climate crisis has not ended, to the best of my knowledge. So we are trying to make a case.
Did I miss anybody? Anybody online? Okay. All right, thank you. Let's keep going. So we do this at every meeting, a chance to offer any edits, comments on the previous meeting summary. Any edits, changes, comments? I'm not seeing any in the room, not seeing any online. We're just gonna put a thumbs up for the meeting summary. Okay. We'll consider our meeting summary affirmed from our last conversation. Next slide. Okay. Edith?
All right, so this is the part where I give an update. So if we go to the next slide, as I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the process, and then I'm going to give kind of a high-level update on the key findings from those complementary analyses that we presented on the 9th. There's a recording of the 16th. Sorry, I keep giving the wrong date of when we did it. The original date was the 9th, and we moved it to the 16th earlier this month. And so the recording is available online for anybody who hasn't had a chance to, if you're interested in digging in more, but we'll also have some space for questions as well. So this slide is just a reminder, really, you've seen it before. These are our 5 policy working groups that our subject matter experts on the team have been leading. And so this is just to remind us, there's an environmental justice and equity group, there's a group focused on buildings and distributed energy resources, there's a group focusing on developing clean electricity generation and transmission, there's a group focused on low carbon fuels, and there's one focused on transportation, electrification, also looking at vehicle miles traveled. We go to the next slide. This is also kind of a reminder, but also an update on where we are in the process, just to help us all get grounded in where our heads are at Odo. So this is an overview of how we've been structuring the discussion, those working groups. So we started with, excuse me, a plenary meeting in early February where all the working groups came together. Some of you were there, some of you weren't. And since then, each group has met twice, so that's why meetings 2 and 3 are kind of in light gray there. Those are the meetings we've had, and they've each met separately. So we started with key takeaways from the modeling and key findings, and then each of the leads kind of kicked off the discussions by grounding us not just in the modeling results, but where are we compared to where the modeling kind of is indicating directionally that we need to go to meet our energy policy objectives. And that kind of kicked off a discussion on challenges and barriers. So we had a really in-depth conversation about that. We did whiteboarding exercises, so it wasn't just the discussion in the room, but also we've been synthesizing kind of all the sticky notes that came out, which gave us a lot more material than you get just verbally in a meeting room. Then we moved on, we had another round of meetings to talk about, okay, well, if these are the barriers and the challenges, what are some proposed strategies to address those barriers, but still not at a kind of specific and actionable level, although there were some recommendations bubbling up along those lines, but just saying, okay, you know, what do we do about these barriers? How do we address them? And how do we tackle them? And our next meeting that you can see, meeting 4, is coming up quite soon. And that's where we are working on synthesizing everything that we heard in the working groups, what we'll hear here today. We've also been talking to sister agencies to make sure that we're understanding how they're operating and making sure that anything we're putting on the table is in conflict and is kind of building off of work that's already happening. And so we will have some proposed policy actions that we want to discuss in that next meeting. And those will be kind of specific, measurable, attainable policy actions. So we will be trying to get specific in that next working group meeting. And really, there are kind of 3 buckets that those policy actions will fall into. There's the bucket of existing policies and kind of continuing existing policies that are working or expanding them in some cases. There's proposing something new, and then there's areas requiring further study. But within that, there'll also be what we've seen bubbling up so far are kind of a combination of it's not all legislative. I just wanted to start with that. It's a combination of where, you know, more financial support might be necessary, where information, just providing better information might be helpful. And then there are some more concrete, more kind of legislative oriented ideas as well. So it'll be a mix. And those proposed policy actions will work on all of those discussions that we've been having. So kind of building on those barriers and frameworks that we have in place today. So that's where we are with the working group discussions. We go to the next slide. I realize this is a busy one. I'm sorry, can you click through, Josh? I meant to take out the animations. There we go. So I show this slide every meeting because I feel like it's important to remember like where we are in this process. So the process runs from February to early June, really, of developing policy recommendations for the energy strategy. And so you can see here kind of that round of meetings we had, a first round of meetings, a second round of meetings. We met on March 20th. When we last met, we had kind of that second round of meetings with 3 of our working groups, but we still hadn't had that deeper discussion with our EJ and equity group and with our transportation group. So today, our update kind of includes a bit of kind of where we are based on those discussions that we've been having, and we also have that presentation of the complementary analysis. I think it's also important to have in mind what we're leading into. So again, we're leading into those meetings that will be, are coming up really soon. Several of them are April 30th, and one working group meeting will be on May 7th, where we're really going to dig in and talk about actionable recommendations. And then we're going to come back here and we're going to discuss that level of detail in the room here. So today we're going to talk more about the policy framing and kind of high level recommendations. When we meet again on May 15th, we'll be talking about those policy actions. But what we talk about today is going to inform our thinking as we work through those policy actions for the working groups. And then we plan to have written kind of a final draft list of recommendations that we put out for public written comment, most likely in very early June. If you go to the next slide. I've totally gone off script here. So All right, so now I'm going to shift to the complementary analysis. I think it's important to help set up the discussion today to kind of make sure that we have the full kind of complete range of analyses that we've conducted to help support these discussions in our heads. So we've talked quite a bit about the results from the modeling that our consultants conducted, the Clean Energy Transition Institute and Evolved Energy Research. As kind of we've talked about before, that modeling doesn't provide all of the information that we need to have a conversation to understand.
Let's get closer to you because of this.
Oh, yeah, sure. What our options are. So we got insights into economy-wide least cost trajectory and implications of different choices we might make. The complementary analysis serves to dig deeper into a few areas. So these are the areas where we were able to undertake quantitative analysis. There's a lot of qualitative discussion too. So I'll talk a little bit about the air quality modeling that we conducted that investigated effects of those shifts in the energy sector on the supply and demand side, on outdoor air pollution, public health, and related economic effects. I'll talk a little bit about the energy wallet analysis, which essentially asked about how technology change might affect a household's budget over time. Excuse me. And then we also have an employment study. I don't have results of that yet. It's underway right now. So in that webinar that we held a couple of weeks ago, we just talked about, we kind of introduced the consultants who are undertaking this modeling, BW Research. So I don't have any updates there. And we also have a series of maps that we've presented. We're not going to get into those today. I think they might be helpful when we get into the more detailed discussion. The idea of the mapping, we worked with our environmental justice and equity working group and then put out for broader consultation what kind of priority indicators that there's data on at census level we might present on maps to just help inform discussions about about kind of how we need to structure policies to make sure that we're taking into account different vulnerabilities and different populations who might be disproportionately impacted by policies, for example, based on data that we have. So that's what the mapping is. So I'm going to focus again just today on air quality and energy wallet. And I'm not going to present the full results, but I will present the highlights. So if we go to the next slide. We used EPA's COBRA model, co-benefits risk assessment tool. That model essentially allows us to take the results from the economy-wide energy modeling that we did and look at air quality impacts, particularly PM 2.5 and other criteria pollutants, and their impacts on public health and the economy. So the changes in emissions come from shifts both on the demand side. So think about transportation shifting from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles, as well as on the supply side when we reduce kind of combustion technologies and shift towards different low carbon technologies. So the analysis looked at the reduction in occurrence of health problems. So things like asthma symptoms, bronchitis, other respiratory ailments. And this model calculates the economic benefits of reducing the incidence of symptoms. So things like reduced hospital admissions, fewer missed work days, reduced mortality. So that's all quantified in financial terms and gives us a sense of the benefits. And we see those benefits in 2030 and 2050. And you can see there are pretty broad uncertainty ranges, but that's kind of the range within which we see benefits. And those benefits are pretty significant. So we see in 2030 benefits of between $205 and $461 million in benefits. And we see a higher number, $500 million to a little over $1 billion in monetized benefits in 2050. Most of these benefits come from reduced mortality, and the reduced mortality is based on the high value of there's a high value of a statistical life that kind of goes into the calculation. So that's where those bigger numbers come from. If we go to the next slide, I just want to show one map that came out of that analysis. So we worked to divide Oregon into regions, and this was also part of our cooperation with the Environmental Justice and Equity Working Group, so that we could understand a little bit of whether there are and to what extent there are differential effects around the state in terms of health impacts coming from changes in air pollutants. So we see here that the per capita benefits accrued kind of more strongly in southern parts of the state. And that has to do with complex airflow patterns that are built into the model and just how kind of air flows around the state and how those pollutants move around. And again, 99% of the benefits come from reduced mortality. So it's really kind of reduced premature deaths that lead to those benefits. Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. Can you talk to us on the previous slide? You mentioned that there's emissions reductions that come from achieving some of these goals. Can you talk about the specific changes or energy and emissions goals that we're achieving that help? Like, is this transportation sector emissions? Where are we getting these benefits from?
It's largely, if you look at the sources of emissions right now, it is large, a lot of it is transportation, but you also have point source emissions. So you have things like gas-fired power plants, and I don't know. Yeah, so it's both. It's not really possible to point. Airflows are really complex and they're built into the model, and so it's really difficult to point to an EV, a shift to an EV here and what that does on kind of localized air quality improvements and air quality improvements kind of more broadly. But those are the drivers, is that shift and the results of the reference scenario essentially. So the numbers come from the reference scenario. We also looked at the differences in the Jillian, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that we looked at we had two alternative scenarios that looked at slower electrification rates. One looked at advanced clean trucks and what happens if we don't meet those goals, and then we looked kind of farther out. And I believe we tested one. I'm not sure if we tested both of those, but we didn't see significant enough difference in results coming from electrification of trucks to like highlight here. There's too much, the range of uncertainty is greater than the range of kind of differences that you see between those scenarios. So we highlight the range of uncertainty here. Jillian, do you want to add anything to what I just said?
Yeah, and that's right. I'll just add that, the primary reason that there's not a big difference is that in those slower electrification scenarios, we're still meeting some pretty aggressive targets by 2050, which is when all of our emissions reductions targets are being modeled, and so you'll see a bigger difference in those interim years, in the early years when we're slower to electrify, but by 2050 a lot of that difference goes away. Not all of it, but much of it.
Did that answer your question?
Almost, but I think, Edith, I think helpfully highlighted that this is a emissions times population exposure question, and that population exposure is a result of complicated airflow modeling that I do not want to discuss here, and I'm sure you don't either. But part of this is how much emissions is being produced, right? And so if we're saying, hey, we are achieving these benefits because we are seeing reductions in emissions, I think it's helpful for us to know where those emissions are coming from, so that when we think about questions like, hey, we have a limited pool of dollars to spend on reducing particulate emissions, what's going to get us the most bang for our buck? And so to the extent that there is, I think, more detailed information, I know we hear this a lot as a priority, and so making sure that we have a good fact base, because this is really helpful in terms of thinking about total benefits.
Yeah.
So to capture that as depending on future asset price about the material, it's like, what is the kind of percentage source coming from different places, and where do you get the most bang for the buck over time? And then just as a process piece, we've had a request online, so folks in the room are asking a question or offering something, if you say your name first, they can actually.
Sorry, everyone, this is Erin Child with Renewable Hydrogen Alliance.
We put it in the chat.
Thank you. Sorry.
Going forward.
That's awesome. Thank you.
And Julian, is there anything else?
Yeah, I was just going to add that Edith, maybe you can verify, but I assume we used, emissions where they stand now in the state, and so we know what those breakdowns are. About 30% coming from transportation, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, we can get you the specific numbers, Erin, but we looked at, where emissions were coming from today, and then modeled them out.
Let me make one more process piece. Two things. One, largely hold questions, and so we have some space for Q&A. If you're in the room, just put your card up. That will be mine. Yeah, so Fred, we'll go to you, modeling.
Just to follow up on that, it's an interesting discussion about
Oh, hi Fred, what's your name?
All right. Fred Hewitt, Northwest Energy Coalition. So the point that was just made about what looks to be in 2050 a relatively small range between different scenarios, but that implies that the scenario range is actually, the gap is actually larger in previous years. So I think it's important, just my point is just to say, in the report out of this process, I think it's important not just to look at the end point, but also cumulative emissions in dollars, both actually, to look at different scenarios or different pathways, so we really have a good sense of what the differences, actually the total differences really are, not just at a single point in time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Aaron, just a reminder that we also have more detailed slides from that presentation that we gave a couple of weeks ago as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the energy wallet. This is we worked to come up with a visual to represent what the heck we were doing with the energy wallet. So we were getting a lot of questions about it. So we looked at 5 sample households to identify kind of how they use energy today and how that might change over time. So if you look at the left hand side of this slide, we looked at each of these representative households, building on NIA's RVSA kind of pool of data to define kind of realistic households, but there's no averaging here because then it wouldn't be a realistic household. And we worked as well with, we started the discussions with our Environmental Justice and Equity Working Group to identify kind of priorities we should try to cover in how we define these households. And we also opened it up and we had a conversation with you all. We got some written comments. So the households were based on that, how we define them based on that engagement. But essentially, the households look at today, vehicle miles traveled, what vehicles do they own and how far they drive. See the little squiggly road up there. How much electricity and natural gas and other fuels do they use in their home? How much do they pay for their energy services today? And what type of building do they live in? Where do they live? And so by type of building, it's both, is it a single family detached home? Is it a manufactured home? Is it a multifamily rental unit? So we tried to include kind of a range of differences. If you dig into the data, I don't have this level of data today, but there's also like the vintage of the house and how much energy it uses overall, which is a reflection on how efficient that home is. So sorry, I'm still, okay, here we go. And then, so we start with kind of that wallet of how much that household is paying across all of these energy uses. So often we see transportation broken out from the other bills, but we decided to combine them because the modeling itself showed kind of that relationship between transportation and the power sector in particular. And so we wanted to make sure that we were, and other fuels, and we wanted to make sure that we were reflecting that in the household energy wallet. And so then we look at what changes in terms of how much that household is paying on its energy bills if we replace an old car or old boiler with an energy efficient electric technology, or continue kind of with no change in technology, electric or otherwise, but replace with a kind of newer model. So it will be more efficient, but it's not a technology change. So you can see that the differences really come from kind of that decision on a purchase of a vehicle and that decision in purchasing of upgraded new heating system. And the replacement happens at the end of a useful life. So there's no early replacement if we can bring this up. So if we go to the next slide. And sorry, before I describe this, I just want to, glad I have talking points here to remind me of things I wanted to make sure I said. The purpose of the energy wallet is really to gain insights into how what we see as least cost pathways at economy level actually look from a household perspective, so that we could be conscious of what this might actually mean for Oregonians, and to gain insights into some of the factors affecting this. So we didn't represent any single utility service territory But we tried to make sure that the housing stock covers all of the different types of housing you see across utility service territories. And we also looked at a range of electricity and gas prices. So we looked at electricity prices from 10 cents to 40 cents a kilowatt hour. And we looked at gas prices from $1, $2.50 per therm. As a starting point, and then those costs evolved to reflect the changes in costs in the model over time. So this illustrates the type of result that we get. It's illustrative, but I think it's a helpful illustration. So here's a household that buys an electric vehicle and a heat pump in 2035, and you can see that there are changes in kind of the energy consumption and therefore the costs that come out of that technology change. And so if you look at the top line in gray, you can see that the left is the household cost. It's their gas bill, essentially their natural gas bill. They're heating with natural gas. You can see in the kind of next over the teal, the electricity, kind of the percentage of the bill that goes to electricity. And then you can see the percentage of the bill that goes to gasoline. This particular house has 2 vehicles. And then when we look at that technology change, we get an idea in 2035 of how that's changed. So we see, if we just look at the same categories in gray, the natural gas cost has gone down because this household just switched to electric. But in response, also the household cost for electricity has gone up because now they're paying for their heating with electricity. And we see that the gasoline cost has gone down because they still have one gasoline powered car, but one of them is electric. But then you see some new things come in here. So we broke out vehicle electricity costs to just be really clear on what proportion of the increase in household electricity costs are for charging that vehicle. We have, you can see household capital cost in pink. So that's the difference in how much more expensive it was to buy that electric heat pump. So we don't account for the full cost of buying the new technology, because you would have to do it anyway, because it's supposed to reflect the bill, but we wanted to make sure that we were reflecting how much more as a portion of the bill you're having to pay off that more expensive technology. A heat pump is more expensive than a natural gas furnace, and so that 15% accounts for that change in cost. And then you also see that there is some savings, and that is, Jillian, maybe you could remind me whether in this example, I don't know if we know at this point, but whether it includes or not the IRA tax credit for the EV, and whether that's driving that 15% reduction in cost of buying the EV relative to an internal combustion engine vehicle.
Yeah, I would assume that. I mean, this is illustrative, so it's kind of hard to answer that. But I assume most of the savings come from the differential in cost between an EV and an internal combustion engine vehicle.
Right, and so the idea is to give you, if we only saw the increase in electricity costs, we wouldn't be seeing the full picture. And so what we're trying to do here is to capture the full picture and then to come up with kind of a net total for this household. This is just illustrative, so I'm going to move on to what the actual results were. But Charity, I see that your card is up. Do you have a question?
Oh, Rebecca, Charity, and Mary Beth.
I might ask at the moment for clarifying questions, but I might answer your questions with the next few slides when I have the results. So, but if there's a clarifying question on the last slide, I'm happy to take it.
Happy to wait and see if you answer them.
Okay, let's do that because I know that I'm setting up questions and I'm trying to answer them with the next couple of slides. I'm sure I won't answer all of them. And maybe there'll be new ones that come up. So these are the 5 sample households. You might recognize the names up there. We have Jessica, Stephanie, Ruchi, Alan, and Hugh. Jessica, I'm just going to point out a few things. So this particular slide looks at the energy usage for electricity and natural gas as a starting point for today. Just to give you a flavor of the differences. So Jessica and Stephanie both have single family detached homes. Steph lives in a cold climate and doesn't have air conditioning. Ruchi's house is also a single family detached home, but it's in a high priority area. Alan's home is a manufactured home, and Hugh lives in a low income multifamily rental unit. Each house, as I said earlier, has its own characteristics. The data is based on NEA's residential building stock assessment. We also have VMT data that we have here. Each household is not an average, right? It's a sample household. For none of these, maybe one of you lives in one of these homes, but there are probably differences in what you see on your bill and in how you use energy in these, because each house has a different profile. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to go through the key takeaways and then I'm going to pause. So when we looked at kind of the range of households and the price ranges that we were looking at, and we also looked at the difference between technology change and no technology change, we saw that all 5 sample households, in most circumstances, save money with vehicle electrification. The outlier that was really Hugh's household, because he relied on public charging infrastructure for 80% of his charging. And that led to much higher cost, and it made it less cost effective to switch to an electric vehicle because he was paying 42 cents a kilowatt, I believe, for his charging. All 5 sample households save energy from electrification of home heating. So you save energy, it leads to a more energy efficiency, but not all sample households save money when they switch to a heat pump, absent policy support. And so we saw, we compared the difference between just replacing existing technology and making that technology shift, and looked at the differences there. And this was a really important insight. Multiple factors impact how great the savings could be from electrification of home heating and transportation. Obviously, energy prices matter, electricity prices matter, gas prices matter, prices at the pump matter. There are also big questions about cost and access to technology for different incomes. So we're assuming the purchase of a new car, but not everyone can afford a new car, is going to be buying a new car. So that's one example. There are also a lot of questions today about supply chains and tariffs and what that's going to do to costs all over the place. There are various policies that can enable access to cost savings to overcome some of that upfront cost differential. And in some cases, even when there is a cost benefit, we still need to work on education, for example. So these are just some examples of the things that we're discussing in our working groups as well: education, incentive programs, infrastructure development, access to technology, workforce development. If we're really serious, we might need more workforce to be knowledgeable and be able to install this stuff. And upfront costs really need to be addressed to ensure equal access to the savings from electrification. And so we saw that people who buy their EV kind of earlier on realize really significant savings. And if you don't have access to that technology, you're paying more than that household who can afford to make that purchase. And so there's a pretty significant equity issue there as well that we need to work through. So I'm going to pause here for questions. I realize I just learned a lot out there. Yeah.
Rebecca Smith, Renewable Hydrogen Alliance, and thank you, Edith. You actually queued up my question beautifully. It really relates to the second key takeaway, because you did mention that you are assuming for the savings you saw earlier, some of the IRA incentives for electric vehicles. My question was about if and how you were able to kind of peanut butter the costs of the incentives already available. I mean, you say absent policy support, but incentives that are available for like heat pump installation, either if you're in an energy trust eligible, or if you're COU, for example. I have Salem Electric, and I got a nice little chunk of change back for when I did my heat pump. And so, are you including those here, or is the assumption that that would just be an extra benefit?
We didn't include the full range because it really differs depending on where you are. I'm in EWEB territory, right? My incentives are different than yours.
Yeah.
There might be some similarities, but what we did include was the cost of the technologies do reflect federal incentives, including for vehicles. We did include, we were able to kind of turn on and off the vehicle incentive to see what happens if it drops out and it's no longer there. And we still saw that purchasing an electric vehicle tends to still be cost effective, but the cost does go up. But we weren't able to reflect all of the changes that we might see. And so that kind of leads us to that qualitative conversation because we're not able to quantify everything. And to be perfectly honest, we're in a high risk time where there are a lot of shifts happening. And so I think one of the interesting takeaways, I would say, from the analysis is that the households that realize the greatest savings when they switch to an electric heat pump today and have the lowest risk are the ones who are currently heating with a less efficient electric technology. And you can generate pretty quick energy savings on the grid, which is streamed today. And so there are kind of, you could stack some benefits there that are much more clear than for some of the other households where things are less clear. And I.
Sure, you can put yours down, you're good?
I'm good. I just wanted to bring water, you needed to have that shed that you were covering with water.
There you go.
Mary Powell, 31,000 friends. Thank you. This is on the vehicle portion of the household energy wallet calculation. How is this tied to something that's in a different work, I think, VMT reduction? Because investments in VMT reduction can mean a household doesn't have to buy a car at all, regardless of its fuel source, or a second car, in addition to benefits to society at large. We're talking about the household here. So I don't see how is that integrated here. And then it also wasn't clear to me from the 5 housing types, which look a lot the same, except for the one high density one, but there was a mention of a high priority area. Is that, I don't know what that is. So was there a location difference in these, in addition to 4 of them seem to be single family detached, various types of single family detached, but I didn't get, are they in walkable areas? Is there a variation there? Again, getting to VMT reduction and what that can mean for households' energy costs overall.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Jessica, do you want to help me out with high priority area homes? Because it comes from a study that
I think, I'm sorry, I'm gonna pass the buck. That's a big. I'm gonna see more in Bethany.
You can get that to me too. I just don't know that.
I'm not, I'll tell you what, I don't want to put more on this spot. I don't remember what all the parameters were around that high priority area. So, since I'm speaking, I will offer a couple of things that I just want to make sure we understand the context around, which is we only had 5 of these wallets from Brightwood, right, which was woefully, just not sufficient, but that was the money we had, so that's what we did. And we did talk to the Environmental Justice and Equity Group, which is why I asked Lauren if she happened to remember. She leads that group up about how we could define what these were. So it's not perfect, and I want to be clear about that, but it does provide us with at least some information to help inform the discussions that are going on. And we'll get back to you, Mary Kyle.
Right, yeah, there's terminology in other state agencies around mixed use, the areas, et cetera. That's not what I heard. That's fine.
Like Google first suggested it's about the building envelope and it has these high priority areas of investment, which you would see in a multifamily.
But in general, just goes to the idea of reviewing VMT through.
No. What I'm struggling with is the report that the high priority area home definition comes from, and I have a slide in another deck that has a footnote. But I will say that I'm remembering that high priority, the report looked at things like, I can't give you the full list, but it included areas, lower income areas. Many of them are urban. I don't know whether this particular house is urban, but many of the high priorities are in more urban areas. There are also areas with a higher proportion of minority populations. So we can follow up with the report. Right. Yeah, but there's a specific report that we drew on. On the broader VMT question, I do want to respond to that, which is that in this analysis, we did not account for changes in VMT. And the reason for that was that we would have had to have data that we didn't have on kind of what you're switching to and what the cost is of that. And so we simplified, as Jessica said, to try to give some directional insights. But I agree with you on the point of the importance of VMT reductions. And we have that scenario where we have those bookends from the economy-wide analysis on the cost savings when you reduce VMT and we meet that 20% reduction. There's a gap that we're hoping that, well, among other things, the working group discussions are helping to fill with perspectives from cities and others on kind of what's working and what's not, and whether there's a space in the energy strategy for recommendations on VMT reduction, which is often an area that's not under kind of state decision-making authority, and so we ran into some difficulty to quantify that.
I understand that, and I'm looking up at the household of about 30% of Oregonians don't drive, so switching out your vehicles is just irrelevant.
Yeah.
Right? So, and that's an increasing percentage.
Yeah.
So I know that's not Odo's necessarily the scope, but you're looking at it. Thank you.
So Fred, then Scott.
Yes, Fred Hewitt, Northwest Energy Coalition. Just a couple of quick reactions, I guess. I'm very interested to see more of this. The one issue is if you're looking 2020 or 2035, 2050, there's a fair bit of stock replacement that's going on with appliances and with vehicles, of course. So one of the questions here is how do you account for that? I'm just asking, this is not the time to get into a detailed discussion, but just a good question because the capital cost then, how that gets incorporated, looking at long-term net value kind of approach, that has to be considered. And also another question I have is how you're accounting for those capital purchases at a household level. Do you spread it out across time? Or is it taken, the big cost is taken all up front, but from an analytical point of view, when looking at the value, how do you spread that across time? And this gets to a second point, gets to one of the curious things about this is saying, well, heat pumps might not always be a good idea. Well, yeah, that may be true, but I'm wondering whether this reflects a difference in the individual or household perspective versus utility level or societal level perspective, because the value of the heat pump may be quite a bit larger to the energy system as a whole than to the individual household. We especially see that in peak scarcity pricing issues where the heat pumps are able to reduce that a significant amount. That benefit goes to everybody, not just to the household. So just as an example. So that raises the issue on a technical level of what discount rates are you looking at for the individual or household level versus utility level, societal level. That's a long-running issue, of course. And then how to value the marginal value. So just some semi-technical comments. And finally, this kind of slice of pie here is getting me very interested in thinking what would happen if you had a lot more detail, both in the residential and in the small commercial area, to provide some guidance about what the impacts are. Big commercial like this building and industrial kind of one of a kind, so you can't really do that kind of analysis. I mean, you could do examples, but it would be difficult to project what the overall effect is. But I'm really curious because even with these 5 building types and household types, you can imagine quite a bit more variety out there. Oh, just drive around and look at your neighborhood. Yeah. So I just think this is really interesting, and I'm not taking this as like a be-all, end-all kind of approach. It's more directional.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. I'll try to be brief. Okay, on the bill, we did include all of the other kind of appliances that are there. We kept them in the background, and I'd have to double check. I assume they should be replaced at the end of their useful lives as well. But we're not changing technology. And so that's when you see the amount of the portion of the bill that's paying for electricity or paying for gas, it's paying for cooking and it's paying for the fridge to run and all of the kind of different plug loads. So that's in there, but wasn't the focus. There was a 7-year payback period for, I believe, both for the vehicle and for the heat pump. So we tried to include kind of a longer but realistic long term of what you might get on the market. I'm not able to respond to the discount rate and the difference that I'd have to ask our.
Well, those are kind of the same thing, actually, when you do under.
Yeah, but I mean, the comparison between the sectors, kind of the household utility societal, I believe we use a 2% societal discount rate. I've seen that in some of our analysis, but it would be hard for me to say.
Yeah, household discount rates are way higher.
Yeah, they're way higher. And I think that there's an interesting question, and I'm glad to see Elaine's fired up because I'm really interested on ETA's perspective about all of this, because it is meant to be This is really meant to tee up a discussion and to give us some insights, but not to answer all the questions. And I am curious whether there are opportunities to do more, or how this is helpful in thinking about how we move forward and how we move forward on a programmatic basis. Also taking into account the maybe we have distribution level benefits on a kind of node that's already really has really high load, and you're gonna have to make a capital investment. But maybe if you switch to electric technologies, you can defer that investment. So there can be benefits like that that are system benefits that we're not quantifying here, but happy to talk.
Scott?
So Scott Sims, Public Power Council. I think one of the things I'd be curious to know more about is just we're seeing a modeling of more energy intensity in the electric sector primarily, right? So you're seeing more electric intensity being modeled. We know that though, that as we get to the higher reaches of more intensity, we start to see scarcity, we start to see pricing really increasing for sources. So I'm just kind of curious about how that figures into the residential energy burden, and then taking another look at the fact that one of the largest growth areas in Oregon and around the Northwest is in the commercial industrial sector. Some of our utilities have got, there's a few that have got more residential load than commercial industrial, but a vast majority of them are seeing the big driver coming from the commercial industrial space, and that's putting price and pressure into the mix for everybody. So just kind of curious to have that be part of the dialogue, and maybe you have, encountered some of that, but it'd be great to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that. And I think I think it's maybe been alluded to here, but we also are seeing dramatic policy shift happening real time across the country, which will drive maybe some positives and some negatives. So we should probably factor in some of those aspects as we look about. I know we're looking at a long-term energy plan, but there are probably near-term signals that are going to have some.
Thank you. So the cost over time comes from the model, which kind of does this bottom-up view of kind of the demand side, and then looks at resources on the supply side and calculates the cost of delivering electrons. I just want to be clear, there's no like rate design in the analysis that we did. So there are, it's meant to be directional and it's not perfect. Hopefully sets up a conversation. The reason that we included that 40 cent a kilowatt hour cost, we put it in 2024, but it was to reflect just what a higher cost would mean, not knowing what those costs are going to be, and recognizing that they'll be different in different parts of our state and under different rate designs. So that's how we tried to get at it, and it's not perfect, but that 40 cents is meant to be like a higher end to say, okay, well, if prices go up this high and then continue to evolve, what does that mean for a household? And we did see differences when we go up that high. And I'm really happy to hear ideas on how we manage the kind of shifting federal policy and what that might mean. And I think that the energy strategy would be a really good place to put in some recommendations that help mitigate risk to the extent that we can. So I really look forward to getting into that conversation today.
Maybe just really quick follow-up. I think we talked previously, it's great to hear in this room, there are folks who are customers of consumer-owned utilities, but the consumer-owned utility emission profile in the state of Oregon is very different than the investor utility emission profile. And so I think we talked before about parsing out strategies depending on kinds of utility communities that are served by different utilities. And I had coffee today. So the idea would be, looking at more of that scalpel approach for some of these impact issues around health and human safety, and basically the long-term effects of emissions is because we've got certain energy intensities that are really different depending on which communities are served by which kinds of utilities. So,
Have a lot of diversity within the.
So before I come to you, when folks can't see the chat, Robert, did you want to lift up your comment chat?
I don't know. Can you guys hear me?
Sort of.
Okay. Well, I just, looking at the cost of the upgrades for the average home is a prohibitive factor a lot of times. And the other, I just agreed with that. And I think finance options also should be something looked at to help people get into that new piece of equipment. So hopefully the energy savings pay for the improvement. More so, I'm going to say on the rural side of things is if I've got natural gas or propane, I may keep that for having backup heat source versus switching over to all electric. So just within, it seems like we have increased power outages, the public safety shutoffs for fire, those types of things. There's other reasons I feel that people are going to want to keep your propane, natural gas, wood stove systems. And so I just want to reference that. Even, it is a factor in more so the rural areas.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. I appreciate that comment, and I appreciate you lifting it up because it's an important point. It's not something that we included in the way that we modeled this. We tried to keep it pretty simple. But even in our high level modeling results, we had some hybrid systems. The most hybrid systems we saw were actually people who have wood stoves as their backup source. And those kind of remain in place. So that's just an interesting insight, but I appreciate this point, and I think it's a really important one. So the fact that we didn't include it, while it doesn't mean that we don't want to talk about it, we do want to talk about it.
Yeah, so most of my sort of thoughts or comments are more about next, like getting into options and things like that. But this is a really hard thing to do. And so just like characterizing 5 sample households makes a lot of sense. But I think what might be helpful is also like providing some indication of prevalence for the situation. And what does Oregon households look like broadly, just to provide some of that background context and putting these in perspective of a larger sort of situation. And then, for each, there are also different characteristics that are going to impact what we just talked about, like the performance of the system and, just the existing structure, the insulation level, the building stock, all that. So somehow like capturing, well, what are those variables or what are those things that we have to keep in mind, knowing that this is just characteristics,
Yeah.
But capturing that for people might be quite helpful.
Thank you. I really appreciate those comments. I will say that when we made the decision on the sample home, we looked at what the most common heating source is for that type of home and then applied that. So we tried to get partway there, but we didn't get all the way there. I would love to have more data on the different variables so that we could say, and there is some good data in the RDSA. We should talk more with what data ETO has, because I think that you all with your programmatic experience have a lot of good data that can help us in the next discussion when we talk policy and we talk about things like where do we focus policy and how.
Was the part of the comment, Elaine, knowing the kind of percentage of different types of sample households, so you could see like 30% are Jessica's style or 10% are Hughes?
In pretty broad terms, but just to kind of give people a sense for what does Oregon look like, or what do households look like broadly, and then what are the sort of deviations or the characteristics that you need to keep in mind, because these analyses are really complicated. They're doing the best job you can at like some sample, but other things to keep in mind.
Thank you. Charity?
Hi, Charity Fain with Community Energy Project. So a couple of things that I just wanted to bring up quickly. When you're talking about that cost that sometimes heat pumps don't save money, I think it's really important to remember from also you highlighted in the previous slide on the general population that there are going to be cost savings that are related to improved indoor air quality from no longer burning fossil fuels. So the wallet isn't capturing those health benefits like as you do in the other area on increased more, lifespan possibly because of less asthma, less hospitalization, less truancy becomes also for like children. So there, while like I know this is economic analysis and like just the cost and what the energy is, there are other costs, benefits from a heat pump. Just having cooling, like for a lot of our clients, yeah, they don't have electric bill in the summer because they don't have cooling. And as we know, we see people dying. So having cooling, we want them to have cooling, right? We want that health benefit of cooling, even though they might add to your energy costs. So it's kind of not as simple as this like model maybe has to portray it, right? So just like to keep that in mind, you're using those health benefits to calculate savings broadly, but you're not really thinking about them in this model of like that wallet and the other savings that someone will have at a household level. Also, we're finding, I'm glad to see you're talking about education. We've now done 100 households, low-income households, electrification in Portland. Installed monitors onto electric boxes in 50 households. So we're seeing real-time usage and kind of studying pre and post to see, and what we find is just a lack, because it's new technology, right? A lack of understanding how to, like, don't turn your heat pump on and off all day, right? Like set it and leave it alone if you want to maximize your savings. So like if you just look at the cost, you might not get that they're not understanding that using it the way you would an old furnace is driving your costs up. So there's a real need for anyone, like I know myself, I got a heat pump system like 5 years ago now, and I think it took 4 years to convince my husband not to turn it off. So we're talking about people, right? And people learn, and people like we all sit and talk about costs and stuff, which is true, but human interaction drives that as well. So I'm glad to see education, and when we get more of our results back, we'll be happy to share those from those households.
Yeah, we would love to see those results. Because there are, I mean, there are just things, as you say, that we didn't include, but are really important, and kind of get at the real things that need to happen, the real challenge, and also really appreciate the point on the air conditioning, because it becomes as important as heating in winter when summer's
It is.
as hot as 30.
And honestly, like you say, home heating, we see the biggest bang for your buck just flat out with water heaters. Water heaters have the most cost savings if you're doing a heat pump water heater.
Yeah. Including the stubborn husband variable. Something to consider. That's good.
I just have a Crackerjack team that I have an answer for very much question to share. So thank you to my team for doing that. So the definition of complementary analysis is on our website, and I believe Hugh is going to throw that link into the chat. High priority areas are defined in Photo's 10-year plan, which I think was the 10-year energy action plan. So that should reduce that. It had to come out between like 2012 to 2014. So get your link in for you on that. It developed an index that includes measures of energy burden along with other factors known to drive energy burden, like affordability or home energy efficiency and housing and other issues, among others. And then when the Environmental Justice and Equity Working Group was providing feedback of about what types of priority indicators they would recommend for geospatial mapping related to tribal communities, rural communities, the percentage of individuals employed in natural resources, indicators of poverty, those without health insurance, race and ethnicity, air quality, and average energy burden. So they had a pretty, I'd say broad, but also very specific list of things that I'm interested in. But check out the link to get more data. Well, thank you. All that.
Thank you, Jessica. Mary?
Thank you. Mary Morelands with Northwest Natural. I just wanted to amplify that Elaine made a good flag about how these homes are representative, right? In addition to having household wallets for energy, there's also a state wallet for policy spend. And so the most bang for your buck opportunity, and I think, for example, I really appreciate Edith, you flagging that we know that moving resistance heat to heat pumps is a guaranteed savings. And we also know that a lot of homes for the RBSA are still resistance heat in Oregon. So is that a place that the focus, a policy recommendation might focus on, knowing that is a real defined issue that also benefits the system at that peak hour? Because resistance heat is really difficult to meet. And obviously I am a gas utility representative, but I'm also a person who uses energy, and I want my energy to work at the peak hour, no matter which system it is. So I just wanted to flag that the opportunity to dial in on these households and these measures that we know are wins seems like a great place for us to spend our very limited policy dollars.
Brad, is that a new?
Yeah, it's great to hear it again. So you don't have to go back, but the previous slide basically lays out the 5 different households with their current consumption profile. And you did record a slide deck on results, but then they're summarized here on the screen. That's fine. But I couldn't be on the complimentary discussion I guess it was last Wednesday. And I've been unable, while we've been talking, but unable to find where I presume there were slides and details of that. But what I'm really asking is, I'm wondering is there somewhere like that or somewhere else I can go, that we all can go to look at the kind of preliminary energy wallet, more detailed summary of what you've been finding?
Yes, and it, maybe, I don't know who's managing. I don't know who the Cracker Jacks are online adding things in. Oh, there's Hugh. I was looking for you. If you don't mind pasting that link so it's easier to find Hugh. So we do have a recording of the presentation and we have the slides, and those slides do dive in much more into the details of the results. And today we fast tracked it because so we could move on and talk about the broader policy discussion, but wanted to make sure that
I think
you can access that.
this is worth going into, and I'm really glad that the department is doing a lot on this. So that we have, it's not a prediction, but kind of, we've got to see where we're going, and raising issues like basically household equity, and also Mary just made, the differences in impacts on the policy recommendations that we may have. Maybe another way around it, a way to shape the policy recommendations, which is what you were just saying. I think I'm now seeing that this could be very valuable for that.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any more cars up, except for Fred's virtual car there. Thank you. Kidding, Fred. And nobody online. Okay. So why don't we keep moving?
Okay. So we're going to transition into talking about policy. I have this key consideration slide up. I imagine you all have seen it. I feel like I've accepted it almost every time we talk now at any venue about the energy strategy. And that's on purpose because, and this has been bubbling up in the room, it's really important to consider kind of a broad range of considerations when we think about how we meet our energy and climate goals. And that includes cost, it includes feasibility, including reliability. In our working groups, we've heard quite a bit about land use considerations and natural resource impacts. We've touched on energy burden and affordability and environmental justice even here today. Resilience, both at system level and community level, is increasingly important and gets at some of those things like making sure that your home is at a livable temperature. Even when there are challenges on the broader energy system, community benefits, and I've mentioned that we're doing this job study. So I'm teeing this up, and actually on the walls, you'll see that these key considerations are up there too, just as a reminder that we really want to hear your insights from these different perspectives and not just talk about the quantifiable, like high level cost and level of discussion that we could have. We really want to dig into these areas because ultimately they inform how we can do a good job in meeting our energy goals. How can we make sure that that's equitable? How can we make sure that we're balancing the need to build utility scale infrastructure with the really important land use protections and natural resource protections that we have in our state. And that's, a lot of that is qualitative, and we want to make sure that we're having a robust discussion and that that we're being explicit about it in the room when we talk about policy recommendations. So if we go to the next slide, so this is just kind of framing. And then I'm going to tee up the activity that we're going to do, and Ben is actually going to kick us off with a description of what we're going to be doing here, and then I'll give a little bit of background.
Let's go to the next slide. Now, we're going to give you probably a couple different spaces for direction, but I realized I'm looking at my own PowerPoint. I was like, why is it not moving? Anyway, so we're going to kick you up, as I said at the beginning. And for folks online, we'll have a mural board link with some folks online that can help you have this similar conversation that we're going to do around the world. So from a structural standpoint, we're going to give you some kind of teeing up concepts and content, and really ask you to go into an exercise where we're going to do it in multiple parts. We're going to ask you to do some individual reflection. You'll see around your space, you have some sticky notes, pens provided. We're going to ask you to give some feedback and reflection. And Edith, you'll show that consideration slide as a filter and a lens in which we're going to ask you to think about some policy concepts and initial recommendations. We're going to ask you to do an individual exercise. We're going to ask you to kind of put your stickies up on these boards. And then we're going to ask you to get up and kind of do what we might call a gallery walk. Really spending time going from place to place, reading and reflecting on what your colleagues are putting on the board. It gives you a chance to dialogue, debate, discuss, etc. And then we'll do a roundtable to really kind of what's coming up for folks, what you can take away, what are some key reflections. So we'll come back to that, but I just wanted to tee up kind of how we're going to kind of spend the time and most of the rest of our time in space today.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to go through a few slides to get us into the space and to tee up what you're seeing on the walls here, and then we can take any questions and dive into the activity. So next slide, please. I'm going to start with this slide. So we've been asking ourselves, how the heck is Odo going to do the thing the bill asks us to do, which is to identify optimized pathways to meet the state's energy policy objectives, develop policy recommendations. So this slide is conceptual, but I want to share with you the framework that we're holding right now in our minds in terms of how we would present the recommendations and the policy piece. So, you can jump forward mentally to the final report and think about how it might be structured. And this is how we're thinking about it. We're thinking that we need to have some levels here. We need to have high level strategies that are directional, that really tell us kind of where we as a state need to go in our energy strategy. And that's followed by, and I'll dig into this. So I'll take questions like when we get to the end, because there's a progression here. So hopefully this conceptual kind of visual is helpful for you. I find these kinds of visuals helpful. So we have 5 strategies that we're going to tee up today. We're going to talk about those 5 key strategies that we propose as kind of the highest level of recommendation that's really directional. And then we, under each of those strategies, we imagine having some high level policy recommendations that again, aren't that level of specificity of being actionable. You need something to activate them, but to really say, okay, what are the recommended actions? How do we talk about, what is our recommendation related to efficiency or electrification at a high level? And so that's that next level that you see. And today, the way that we've structured the discussion, we have, we're going to put 10 on the table for discussion. It doesn't mean that there's only 10, some of it can be disaggregated. We want to have a conversation about, are we covering the landscape? What's missing? And how do you see this framing? Is there anything you would change? And then each policy recommendation then would be accompanied by policy actions that are specific, measurable, achievable. And I've already talked about kind of those 3 buckets of like continuing what we have and building on it, new things that we might suggest and areas of further study. So this is the framework that we're working off of. If we go to the next slide, I just want to emphasize that this is the focus today. So today we're focusing on the highest level And we're essentially putting on the table ideas that we want to work through with you. So we're not starting with a blank slate. We're going to provide you with what we've come up with. We're going to talk about it. Go to the next slide. So I want to start with what is a strategy? What does that highest level represent? I think that's important for us to sort of align on. So each strategy that I'll present in a moment represents the direction that Oregon needs to pursue in order to meet our energy policy objectives. And one of and these objectives include reliability, affordability, resilience, and climate. All of those things need to work together. Strategies are meant to be framed as directional. They draw on the results from the energy strategy modeling, but also from the engagement that we've been going through pretty intensively over the last couple of months. They're organized around key elements or pillars of Oregon's energy system. So I think one of the, what does the energy strategy do that other reports don't do? We look across sectorally, we look at the interaction between those sectors. So we're looking at the interaction between the power sector, energy efficiency and transportation, fuels. So we're looking at kind of what's happening at the intersection of those sectors as we move forward towards meeting our goals. The strategies are not meant to set a concrete goal, like a percentage, like X percentage heat pumps by a given year. That's not the purpose of this level of recommendation. It's not explaining it's not putting in place a certain pace or scale of electrification or resource build out, for example, but these strategies are meant to guide our state over time. So one of the things that the energy strategy is supposed to do is be revisited. We're supposed to revisit it over time. And I think it would be really powerful if in the energy strategy, we came up with strategies that we see as consistent and with kind of longevity built in at this level. Okay, next slide. So here are the 5 strategies, and the way at the moment that we frame these is you can see up top, to meet its energy policy objectives, Oregon must advance along the following 5 pathways. And then we just have it's a list of headings, but we're saying that we need to advance along each of these 5 pathways. Energy efficiency and electrification of buildings, electrification of transportation and reducing vehicle miles traveled, distributed energy resources, including, and I have including here, it's a little more detailed than the others, but I don't know that there's a shared definition here of what people mean when they say DERs. So it's explicit here. It includes solar PV, it includes distributed batteries and flexible electric loads, clean electricity and low carbon fuels. We go to the next slide. We have, and under each of these strategies, the strategies in the bolded part of these boxes, we are putting on the table for discussion today recommendations that frame up where the action needs to be. So you'll see here that we frame this up to be very symmetrical with that kind of conceptual slide. So we have here 5 strategies and 2 policy recommendations under each. The goal here is to cover, first of all, to cover the landscape. So recognizing this is high level, are we missing anything? Is this framed up in enough detail to cover the things that we need to cover? In the working groups, we've also often disaggregated this into more topics, but here we've done more roll-up. So I want to talk a little bit about how we came up with all of this, because it's been a very deliberate process. So the 5 strategies I already mentioned, they're very similar to the highest level of insights from the modeling. And we think that those insights do set important direction for our state. And then how we implement those is up to kind of more detailed consideration of pace and scale and barriers and how we approach those. The policy recommendations draw on key high-level insights from the modeling, but also discussions in the working groups, those barriers that we talked about, and other discussions that we've been having, sector agencies looking at the landscape of what we have in place today, and also considering that kind of flower and those key considerations. So we've kind of considered a lot of different angles of coming up with this, and are ready to just get into it as well. So this is, but we're going to be iterating on this over time. This is the first time that we're presenting this to anybody, but have tried to put a lot of thought into the words, and so we're also happy to talk about the words that are on the page. I think that that's an important way to have the conversation, and that's why we wanted to make sure that we had something in writing for you all. Go to the next slide. I can't remember what's here. Okay, it's just a reminder of the key considerations. So that's really it. So maybe we pause Ben here for questions. If there are any clarifying questions, it probably would be helpful if we go back for me, maybe to read through what those recommendations are. Sorry, I skipped that. I did mean to do that. So, okay, I'm just gonna read what's on this slide so that we all hear the words together that are on the page, and then we can talk about what we're gonna do with this. So we have energy efficiency and electrification of buildings. Thanks, Josh. So the first recommendation is improve the energy efficiency and quality of existing residential and commercial buildings. The second recommendation is advance energy efficient electric heat pumps and other high efficiency electric equipment while maintaining electricity system reliability and protecting customers from high future costs and volatility. The next strategy is electrification of transportation and reducing vehicle miles traveled. So there we have reduced barriers to transportation electrification to ensure vehicles in the state electrify at the pace and scale necessary to meet our goals. Second point is prioritize policies and programs that increase transportation options and efficiency. Distributed energy resources, support integration of electric loads while reducing the impact on the electricity system, and support integration of variable renewable resources. So this is kind of a cross-sectoral one. It includes kind of new electric plug loads like EVs and electric heat pumps and things like that as well in terms of flexibility. And support distributed clean energy resource development to reduce system costs and the need for new transmission while increasing resilience in households and local communities. Clean electricity, promote in-state and regional development of clean electricity generation, storage, and transmission. And support regional market and planning opportunities to enhance grid efficiency and lower costs. And then low carbon fuels, promote development of low carbon fuel resources to increase their overall supply, affordability, and availability. And reduce demand for fossil fuel resources and ease the transition burden to low carbon fuels and hard to electrify applications in transportation, industry, and electricity generation while retaining resilience and safety, including industrial sectors. That's quite a mouthful, but there are a lot of, we could have broken it out into more, but we really wanted to keep the number of items that we put on the table tight. So. But I just want to point out that this is where we see industry coming in. So energy efficiency and electrification of buildings, we don't mention industry. We see industry much more closely tied to the fuels discussion because there are a lot of industries that have trouble electrifying. There are electrification opportunities, but we wanted to, that's where we placed industry. So I just wanted to be explicit, we haven't forgotten about our industrial customers and again. So that's a lot, and I'm sure that I see people taking notes and already thinking about these. Ben, I realize that we're sort of at like that break time as well.
So if we go to the next slide, and then we'll put this back on, and Fred, I'll come back to you in a second. Or let's go to 2 slides. We're at 10:40. What I'd like to ask is that we kind of build our break and your stickies together. So from about 10:40 to let's say 11:10. I'd like you to take a break, do some stickies, and start putting them on the wall and start kind of moving around with each other. Right, so as you put your stickies, someone else puts a sticky, talk about it, you kind of review, and you'll kind of just continue to make your way around the room, having these kind of ongoing conversations. We are probably a little bit behind from where we had imagined being at this place, but the hope is that you all are kind of using those sticky notes and responding to what you like, where you see some of these benefits, plus the questions in front of me.
Sorry.
Yeah. Sure. What concerns do you have, or where do you see risks, or perhaps what's missing? Would you rephrase anything to alleviate your concerns? And then really, you'll see that the policies and the strategies are on these flight stickies. You also have the key considerations up on the wall as well. So if you're going through this, really we're trying to do this initial assessment of where is the energy moving, where are you supportive, what concerns do you have, where are the risks, how does it kind of relate to key considerations? I see a couple cards, Fred, Joshua, Jessica, and Chandra.
Yep, straight here again, the categories make pretty good sense. I'm wondering though, as mentioned, that what about, how do we deal with, or how are we going to incorporate things that are outside of those 5 boxes, basically? For example, industrial, which is both existing industrial, multi-fuel, lots of complications, and new data centers and other large new electric industrial loads. That's obviously a big issue. Just as one category, but there are lots of others in different sectors. How is this going to encompass those kinds of ideas and recommendations?
So I would love for you to either suggest a different heading or how we might fit the kind of things you're talking about under the headings, or whether we need an additional heading. So I think, Josh, I'm looking around the walls and I don't think that we have a sticky, do we have extras? We'll put one up with the 5, because I also like comments on those 5, and I don't see a sticky. So we'll put one up with those 5, because I think that's the kind of discussion we want to get into. We want to see what you see is missing from the framing as it stands, so that when we frame up the final report, we're taking into account some of these complex areas.
Joshua, you're good?
I had the same question for that.
So what's missing, Jessica?
Just a couple of things. One is, that on the slide, something wrong that we need to make sure everybody's clear about, which is, we indicated that distributed energy resources, not investing in the make costs go down. It's actually the opposite, so fix that, but it didn't get into this final slide deck, so I apologize for that. Second thing, really important, I'm seeing that some people, well, I'm not seeing it, but I'm hearing that some people are in the Miro board and they're in there offering new actions. And I don't want to indicate that new actions aren't important, but what we're really looking for is reactions to what's up there. If you see a pain point, or you see something that isn't getting to the right places and all those considerations in that flower picture, we want to hear about that. So flag that. And if that leads you to a new action that you think we need to think about to address that, I think that's a good space to be in. But focus on that input, what you're seeing in these different policy action proposals.
Thank you. Like, so what do you like? Where do you see benefits? What concerns you? Where do you see risks? Would you rephrase anything that could mitigate some of those concerns about applying these considerations? So we are at 10:45. They ask us to take your break and do your stickies and start putting it on the board. We'll help support the process. And then I'll try to bring us kind of back around 11:10.
Hands up. Just wanting to see if there's any specific guidance for those of us online around the break. And I mean, the break followed by sticky exercise is working for the room, but I don't want to deny our online users a break if they need it. And is it just the same idea that take a break and then come back to the Miro board?
Yeah, that's correct. And then did you say you needed the slides? They went out, right, John?
Yeah, I'm sharing the Miro board now.
Okay.
Okay, so for those folks online, if you feel like you need a break, go ahead and take a break and come back to the Miro and we'll check back
right.
here.
That's
in a
right.
few
Thank
minutes.
Thank you.
To those who are online, does anyone have any questions? I think a lot of folks are still not in the Miro board. Are there any questions about accessing the Miro board?
Nope, no questions. Thanks for reminding me to come back and start participating.
Cool. Thanks, Shannon.
For the folks online who are coming back from the break, if you're having any issues with the Miro board, speak up, or if you'd like to have a conversation about any of these topics, happy to chat a little bit like they're doing in the room. Just a reminder for the folks online that we're down to about 5 minutes in case you didn't see that in the chat. And again, let me know if you need any help with the mural board or if you have any thoughts that you'd rather discuss.
have folks kind of read out every single sticky that's out there. I promise that the photo team will be capturing everything that was put on. What we want to do is give folks a moment. Maybe we want to ask you, when I say that, your own interpretation, what is intentional language. Like, not a thesis, thinking, and whatever, and we have 25 or so folks who want to do a roundtable. What I'd love for folks to be able to do is share something that was kind of a top priority for you when you heard kind of concepts, notes, concerns, risks, hopes. Or maybe something that's just coming, right, and you saw it written, you had a conversation around. I want to chance to kind of provide some reflection. I'll note that it's 11:16. We want to hear from every single person, so just be respectful of that. So try to manage your comments, maybe 1 minute, minute and a half. Okay? Go around folks, okay? Okay, Kyle, I'm going to start with you.
So, what was the name? Well, it just means a lot from walking around.
Yeah, so maybe some reflections on what you learned, what you're taking away, or something that you really just want to put on the table as a point of emphasis.
I think like sort of the first step, which is reducing the need for any kind of sphere or anything at all, like by being building efficient, that they don't just need in their, electric appliance or would need better, much need for. Or as I mentioned earlier, just reduce the need to drive overall because, or maybe using e-bike rather than e-car. So just reducing the need to energy, just reduce. So, and I will ask you if you're soft spoken
Yeah. Well, there's a highlight on starting with reduction. That's kind of a primary goal, so you reduce the need for energy consumption.
Right.
So.
You have to project. Yeah.
Echo, focus on energy efficiency, every dollar saved, better for customers. I think that should be a big priority in all of what we're talking about here. Some of my concerns are, of course, with the federal funding opportunities and how we're going to meet these recommendations, and we're going to really think about that. I really do appreciate the bullets under each of these categories, and particularly clean electricity, thinking about the regional market planning opportunities. One thing we're doing at Hub and a lot of planning dockets you see are talking about integrated system planning. How can we overlap some of these goals? For example, like meeting our future capacity needs, but also addressing wildfire needs, resiliency for communities. So, maybe it's even more about distributed energy resources than we have before. Really those ways to save costs for customers, because we're losing federal funding opportunities and we're going to have significant capacity needs, we'll have infrastructure upgrades. So really thinking about that, energy efficiency first, and the overlapping of these different things. So I hope that was the piece.
That was awesome. Thank you. Good luck.
Yeah, I would maybe echo the support that's been stated so far for the synthesis that's been done of, I think, a lot of really broad feedback into 10 specific bullets. I do think that, from a hydrogen perspective, to get deeper in terms of getting technical, getting tactical, getting into the weeds of implementation and the specific policy actions that the state is going to take. And so I think for us, main concern is just making sure that while this is a good 10,000 foot level, that we keep driving into the weeds and getting into some of the specifics we're talking about.
Mary Moreland, Northwest National, folks on the phone. I wanted to give another +1 for energy efficiency and conservation. That's evergreen priorities, and they help both on the household affordability front and carbon reduction. Can't lose sight of those. But then also, I think to me an important flag is regional resource adequacy, which comes and goes in these conversations as it relates to PPE. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, especially policies that shift loads from one system to another, making sure we don't do so in a way that would exacerbate those reliability challenges.
Thank you, Scott.
Scott Sims, Public Power Council. I would do a double thumbs up on the regional resource adequacy and the potential for shifting burdens from one sector to another. On the clean electricity slate, I just made a friendly amendment. I think it says promote in-state and regional development of, and I would just say development and expansion of. There's, I think, some opportunities in there for expansion. I also put on that sector that I think there's questions raised about regional versus Oregon. I would just flag that we are, the BPA system is a 6-state system, the Pacific Core system is a 6-state system, and the transmission is highly integrated and interrelated. So parsing out state elements without a nod or an eye to that larger resource plug-in is really critically important for us as we go forward on a planning basis. It's again, similarly on the transmission side. On the low carbon fuels side, so enabling legislation for small modular reactors. So Washington State is actually statistically more of a blue state than Oregon, and they are actually ahead of us on the SMR development path. And I think that there's opportunities for us to develop small modular reactors in selective spots, potentially that plug into the not only the low carbon fuel side, but also the distributed energy resources side. Lastly, on distributed energy resources, so California has a terrific model with the Strategic Energy Reliability Reserve. It is a system in which they have built natural gas and other facilities. The natural gas facilities have catalysts for them to capture as much as possible the fossil fuel impacts there. And they have an emergency use only declaration on those and are being hydrogen ready for the future so that they would transition from natural gas to hydrogen. Extremely important, I think, as well, to think about retiring diesel fleets in our some of our emergency response areas to be able to use natural gas and eventually hydrogen. So it's better to burn natural gas than diesel. So looking at those options as well for bolstering the system from a distributed energy resource and reliability standpoint. Lastly, I'll just say soapbox really fast. I've been working a lot at Public Power Council on the federal workforce issues, and it's real. Bonneville and the Corps of Engineers and the Bureau, they're losing people. NOAA, Fish and Wildlife Service, EPA, the list goes on. Forest Service. I think we have to be thinking about state resiliency from basically kind of belts and suspenders for state-supported efforts, because the federal piece is just really going to be falling away in a few years. It's going to be something that we're in 100 days of damage, we're going to be doing damage control and repair for decades to come. So we need to think about more about these strategies that have state self-resiliency built into them. Thank you.
So two main things. First, as already been said, energy efficiency is the foundation for what we're doing. Oregon has a lot to boast about, I think, and we have a lot more that we can do. Although it seems like, kind of like we assume that it's going to happen, we have to really emphasize it. And I think that the key reason is the uncertainty we're facing going forward, particularly on demand, is putting this front and center. 4 decades ago, when the Northwest Power Act passed, the Power Council, once it got set up, was really focused on the uncertainty in future demand. At that point, it was still felt that we would have major growth, industrial growth, and other kinds of growth in the Northwest. It didn't really happen. But I think we're back in a situation now where we are already experiencing that kind of growth, and it's real, it is for real. But there's a lot of uncertainty about the range that we cannot reduce the uncertainty at this point. We only can prepare those things that give us the best opportunities or the best range of options. So energy efficiency, not just in end use, but in all aspects of our energy delivery, is a really important thing to really do this strategy to focus on that and make sure we get it done and open our sights a bit on what we think is actually possible and cost effective, because that too is changing very rapidly right now. And in energy efficiency, just like in generation, there's a tremendous amount of technology innovation going on. So I think we have something to draw on there. The second thing I want to say is, as Scott just said, it is we're not just a single isolated state. For both the electric and gas networks, part of a regional network. Most of our gas comes from British Columbia, some from the Rockies. Our power grid is integrated across a huge area of 90 million people in the West. So we can do a lot on our own, but we also have to remember that we're integrated into a large system, and we should behave like that and move in the direction of, as much as possible, not just acting on our own, but acting in concert with all of the list. So I'll just say that as well. There are, and on the question of federal support, it comes and goes. It may come back someday, I sure hope so, but that is for real. And we're in a very unfortunate situation that we did not have to be, but here we are, where we're going to have to rely more on our own bootstraps.
Lauren?
Yeah, Lauren Lake, the Nature Conservancy. I guess I'll just focus my comments on the clean electricity piece. You know, I just was looking at the definitions around grid efficiency and lower costs, and with the grid efficiency, also looking at like increasing capacity and resiliency, and really in the planning opportunities, like prioritizing existing lines in that space. And then lower costs, you know, just always want to call out, I understand lower cost to consumers, but also to ecosystems, to communities, to our natural working lands. And so I know that's in the key considerations, but I was also just kind of going around thinking of like, the devil's always in the details. So is that like, you know, do we have to call it out right now, or are we going to have like more conversations around like policy action? So, yeah.
Elaine Kratz, Energy Trust. And I focus on efficiency and distributed energy resources. A lot has been said that I was thinking about saying, so I will do that. That's all really great comments. But I guess the reaction I have is that maybe it's not possible to put on these simple bullets, but it's more of like, there's a balance of really active, you know, we know what the low-hanging fruit, like the near-term priorities could be, and can we focus on that? But also think about integrating planning into some of this, and planning so that, you know, the state leadership theme I'm hearing here, like how do we all plan how we're integrating our work more efficiently than we have in the past, so we can get this done, because the urgency is upon us too. So, you know, just finding efficiencies and how we work together for delivery of efficiency, for innovating, because I also think that that aspect of maybe taking things for granted on energy efficiency that's been there, you know, because we've moved to other shiny objects. So, you know, it's like, let's get back to the technology, the building science and the basics. How do we get done?
Yeah, I mean, I think I echo kind of what everyone's saying here. And I guess, you know, where we see a lot of barriers is there's a lot of policy recommendations, there's a lot of rules that, you know, looking here, there may already be existing rule development under those kind of things. And so seeing how those programs kind of play out rather than adding another red tape, that it becomes very difficult to produce any of these things and to implement any of these things and for end users to be able to use these things. We see that a lot with fuels. We see that a lot with, you know, just all kinds of different stuff. So I think rather than being so cumbersome, some of these things, I think the devil is in the detail of really having an understanding what is our local communities and cities doing, what is the state, how that integrates with the state, and also federal obligations as well. I think that can sometimes trip us up because we don't want to encourage businesses to move out because it becomes so onerous, or we see that a lot on lower carbon fuels too. We get bypassed quite a bit. So just keeping that in mind, that we don't want to make things more onerous for individuals. And also just influencing behavior that we would like to see. I think more incentive programs and
ways to get us through some of those barriers so that we do see those end uses here in Oregon.
Yeah, Joshua Bassett with Climate Solutions. Couple of things. I think it's important that we keep in mind that load growth is going to shape the operating environment that we're working in with a number of these different policy recommendations. And that we need to really mitigate the impacts of that load growth in Oregon, particularly vis-a-vis like large energy use facilities. And I think that's really kind of like, especially for the clean electricity category, that's kind of like the 5,000-pound gorilla. We can talk about, development of clean electricity and transmission, but we need to understand that's in the context of like some really significant load growth projections for the state. And then, kind of, I think Aaron alluded to this, that these are pretty high level recommendations. And I just think it's important that we make sure that we keep things within scope, make sure that they're sort of right sized so that they include everything that we want in these recommendations. So as an example, I really think that we should have a very broad definition for DERs. We talked about a few of the things that are included in that definition, but I think it should be a really broad definition, include things like microgrids, DEPs, small scale renewables, community renewables. And just make sure that we're capturing everything that's going to be useful and valuable as a distributed resource. And then
Emily Griffith with Renewable Northwest. I also kind of focused on the clean electricity strategy, and on the second bullet in particular, I was thinking maybe we could have something more proactive than simply supporting existing opportunities. At least that's how I read it. And kind of what Lauren was saying about grid efficiency, I think we also need to add in capacity there. I see the two most inhibitive barriers to energy development as limited transmission and land use permitting. And so I think there could be a specific call out to land use here as well. I think it needs to be a formal recommendation, at least maybe with the policy, because Renewable Northwest has thought for a long time that we could include renewable energy in our land use planning goals, just as a consideration, while also continuing to protect everything else that's included in our land use goals. And then, yeah, just walking around the room, I was thinking about how integrated everything is. And so, like Joshua and others mentioned, these are high-level statements. And so I'm thinking and hoping eventually we'll have another meeting where we think about how all of this interacts and the implications of that. And then I'll also just give another +1 to the concern on with all of the federal uncertainty and the need to protect our state's resiliency and protect our current state policies.
Chris?
Hi, Chris Golightly with the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, and I walked over during this exercise, so I didn't get to participate completely, but I am just pulling thoughts together right now. Coming from like a tribal fishery and tribal resource perspective, I definitely echo the underscoring energy efficiency as a primary tool, a primary fish-friendly tool for getting to our goals. And included in with that, I see DERs as a big tool. So policy being to support these as a way to both shave off peak needs and the hydro reliance that comes with those, as well as possibly transmission needs. I know with the incredible load growth we're projecting that, transmission is a big issue, but, as you were just saying, land use, when you say that, I think tribes and tribal lands, as being the primary recipient of those transmission lines and a lot of concerns there with tribal resources. So the less we, or the more we can distribute our energy resources, and lower transmission needs, the better from my perspective. So energy efficiency and distributed energy resources, and policies.
Jimmy?
Yeah, Jimmy Lindsay, Portland General Electric, and a lot of great thoughts around the room. I think I'll focus my comments on sort of two things. One, I did try to make an effort to add a thought, like, hey, how to expand some of the categories here, some of the things we're talking about. Obviously, electricity, like, looms large across everything. And I just sort of encourage us to think about, as a group, how we can really be like sort of focusing on sort of allocating costs in a sort of direct and rational way. There's been a lot of really healthy, I think, dialogue at the state level about thinking about an issue for big industrial customers, and that's continuing, and I think that's important. But also, bigger picture for the work we're doing here, achieving policy aims through electrification, which obviously has like broad benefits, but we need to think about like how do we sort of directly fund those activities through policy rather than sort of like financing this all in the electric bill, because having electricity costs that are increasing much beyond inflation for a long period of time is something that I think PGE is recognizes isn't going to work, and people will have quite a negative reaction to. So the concept of like the energy wallet, which I think has been quite useful in this exercise, is important. But how do we recognize that that all sort of electric customers are different in that case, and some folks may sort of see that trade-off in costs and see that as a gain, and others that's not a trade-off that is going to work for them in that particular situation. Recognizing that if you fund everything on electricity bills, some people are paying for the cost and others are paying, others are paying different. That can be problematic from an allocation perspective. And then the second thing I'll just choose to emphasize is on the subject of regionalization, and which is here on the Clean Energy Board behind me. I think just want to emphasize what Fred and Scott were saying earlier about the importance of our power system that exists well beyond Oregon. Like, we definitely can't sort of we shouldn't try to decarbonize on island. We need to like sort of benefit from the power system that exists. We need to be exchanging power with our neighbors. And so I think on the board behind me, like some of the language that's on there right now about like geography is perhaps not helpful, or I find it a little confusing. And I also think it might be useful to kind of underscore or sort of be more direct in the elements behind me that are focusing on markets. I think that the state does have a big role to play to sort of emphasizing that one regional market is important. And right now we're in a moment where like markets actually bifurcating, and it's working against I think the names the state has. And so those are the things that themselves.
Charity?
Hi, Charity Fain with Community Energy Project. I'm going to focus on energy efficiency and electrification of buildings. That's what we do. Particularly we work in low-income households. The goal here to me is really too timid. And I say that because it's just not really clear to me, as stated, that you're really stressing electrification in this. If you can improve the energy efficiency of the building without electrification, what does improve the quality of a building actually mean? You can put in a new kitchen and improve the quality. So that term of itself, I don't really get why it's in there. What does quality in regard to this context mean? Same thing, next one, advanced. Advanced can be kind of tepid. You can do very little in advanced energy efficient heat pumps and other technology, again, non-electric. So is the goal efficiency and electrification truly as stated, or are they two separate buckets that maybe intersect and maybe don't? because you can. If you went from like oil heated home that we see a lot of households with to a high efficient gas furnace, you would be improving energy efficiency. You would not be electrifying. And I think we need to be very clear what you really mean there. Otherwise, I don't really know what this strategy is. Because those two subsets don't really say electrify buildings. They say improve efficiency, which we as a state has been doing for a long time. And it has gotten us where we need to go. So let's just be more specific and clear. If electrification is the goal, it needs to say it.
Terry, Jeff?
Jeff Hammerland, retired professor and group historian. Fred Hewitt, but the other group historian, stole my thunder brilliantly, however, so well done, Fred, on the history of the Power Council and regional planning and deeper flexibility. So I'll just say ditto on that piece. My biggest concern right now has to be what the withdrawal funding and support of the Trump administration is placing on the entire Northwest and our country, actually, but especially the executive order that was released about 10 days ago that basically says that pretty much everything we're doing here, supporting a clean and just energy future, is woke and should be fought vigorously by the Attorney General, because it's not supporting a coal and fossil fuels and nuclear. So yes, it's probably almost certainly unconstitutional, and any reasonable Supreme Court would know that right off the bat, but the question is, do we have a reasonable Supreme Court right now that would follow through? So I'm really working a lot on trying to protect the integrity of what we have in the Northwest. Pretty much all my working hours on something called the CR 28, which is a environmental rights amendment that include in the state constitution that we all have guaranteed right to clean air, clean water, and healthy climate to protect a lot of the legislation we have now from being abolished by the Trump administration. So that's an important one. I wanted to echo what Mary Kyle mentioned about the urban planning side, the role it would play in reducing single occupancy of travel with bicycles, pedestrian, public tracks, and those sorts of things. And I can't possibly stop without mentioning that I have concerns about the safety of our pipeline system and making sure that we can deal with sure that we have integrity, because have those pipelines, want to make sure that they're safe, and I want to make sure there's insurance, which we don't have now in the state. There's no requirement for insurance, reliability insurance for those pipelines. So maybe one needs to be exposure for all holding the back. So on that.
Thank you. Rebecca Smith, Renewable Hydrogen Alliance, trying to use my outside voice. I also want to tip my hat to a number of you, including Fred Hewitt, talking about that regionality. And, I also want to touch on the integrated systems, but want to remind us that it's the electricity system, the natural gas system, but then it's also our liquid fuels and other molecules as well. Sometimes that third one is left out of the dance card. And those three are truly integrated. And as we think strategically, we need to consider them all together. And then additionally, not only within the bounds of Oregon, but across the region with respect to supply and demand and markets. You know what, short and sweet, we'll leave it there.
Thank you. I think I captured the folks online. My computer died, so I'll do my best. If I miss you, let me know. I got Ivy, Patrick, Rakesh, Robert, Tucker. Is that accurate, Josh?
Tucker dropped off.
Mine is Tucker. All right, Ivy.
Hey, I think there's a lot of things that are going on right now with the changes. I think someone mentioned about like the policies that we're dealing with this administration too. And there's a lot that we're still navigating while we're trying to build up this model here. And this is kind of just my 2 cents thinking, but I think that as we're building this, and we have brought up some great things on Mural, which I really think are very, very important to it. It just feels like a part of me just doesn't feel like there's enough time to kind of have all of these and we're not going to have the answers right away for this, but I think there's a little bit more research we have to do, and there's a lot of constraints still. So that's all.
Patrick?
Yeah, I guess real quick, I'll just echo what a lot of folks in the room are saying regarding energy efficiency. I think that's going to be a really essential component with this strategy. I also want to emphasize a lot of the success that we're having with net metered customer generation projects. I think that's a great way to get more folks from the public sector involved in this kind of stuff, and with those increased numbers, it can add up to be a pretty big difference.
Patrick, Rakesh?
Yeah, firstly, my apologies. I had to step away for part of the session, so missed that discussion. Echo several of the comments that have been made already. Just like to maybe double click on a couple of topics specific to transportation, electrification, and being from Daimler Truck North America, my stake is more on the medium and heavy duty side of things. So think class 6, 7, and 8 vehicles. But firstly, a lot was said about the federal policy and federal incentives, and I cannot overemphasize that from a perspective of divergence of policy and regulatory perspectives between federal and state. We are seeing some of that already. We have been with federal and California and Oregon as an opt-in state, adopting California's advanced clean truck regulations, for example. The more divergence we have, the bigger the challenge is going to be to accomplish electrification or decarbonization. In an ideal state, I'd like even North America and Europe to be in lockstep, because we are a global organization. We need global platforms to really accomplish this transformation. So that is probably the number one challenge. The other one I'll quickly comment on is cost of ownership. I did participate in this modeling that was done earlier, and thank you for that. For household and passenger car vehicles, I don't know if heavy duty vehicles were addressed subsequently that I may have missed, but that we see still as a challenge with cost of ownership. Battery cost, for example, diesel is just a hard fuel to compete with from a initial vehicle price perspective, and from a class 8 vehicle perspective, right? The energy consumption, the energy cost is one of the biggest metrics in the total cost of ownership equation, along with driver cost. And yes, we as an industry have been making headway to improve that, but with this uncertainty, the start-stop scenario that we're dealing with, that's going to delay the effort quite a bit and present additional challenges. And I can say the same about infrastructure as well. A hard problem to accomplish, making progress, but any kind of a start-stop scenario in federal regulatory uncertainty would delay that effort quite a bit. Thank you.
Robert?
Yeah, I just, energy efficiency, I think, needs to be a priority, and for many reasons that have already been stated, but there's many other benefits that come out of energy efficiency. If you look at the home, it may be the comfort, maybe the improved LED lighting, the productivity, the profitability for the business and such. And so it just seems like we always talk a lot more about renewables and those types of things, and energy efficiency is something that's there. I think financing, looking at the incentives that are available, are for policy related things. The other comment is just around, I feel like sometimes we either want all or nothing, and I feel like we should really focus on what is achievable near term that we can be working on now, whether it be electric vehicles or fuel sources or whatever that is. And so those are a couple things. And then I had added some notes on the mural board, just major concerns on the federal funding, federal staffing, federal programs, because they make a big impact on what actually happens here in the state. So thank you.
I think that's everybody. Did I miss anyone? All right, look at that. And for 11:50, so Edith, I know you folks, and we had some backup federal questions. It sounds like you actually got a lot of that out of this conversation. Just maybe a couple, just a process piece. So for the Bureau Board, Odo, do you imagine kind of taking what's here and combining it on the Bureau and we can share out with all one place electronically?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, I haven't looked to see, I imagine there's no attribution. That's probably better for everybody. Folks are probably more comfortable that way. So we would just roll it up and just kind of reflect back what we saw on the boards. But happy, obviously, to continue. That'll help us continue the conversation, I think. Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah, so Scott Sims, Public Power Council, just really fast to say, it benefits to hear other people's feedback in the room. And one thing I just want to go back to was what Christine Golightly said about tribal lands. I think there's a huge opportunity that we should really look at for in the state where you've got, investor utilities, you've got publicly owned utilities, and we've got tribal partners. And there's a huge opportunity for tribes to be in a power position, if you will, for development of distributed resources where they get to kind of call the shots and be in an enabling place where they can have some justice for their communities, for they're often more low income and you're usually in rural areas. I think that I just want to make sure to note that it's not on a sticky, but I think that's a really great area we could explore, especially with the fallout of a lack of federal funding, lack of support from BIA, lack of support from DOE and others who traditionally funded these kind of programs. But I think the power possibility is the state and then the investor and the utility community, folks like Amazon, others, and then tribes. They could be actually a really cool outcome of this effort. So I just wanted to note that as something we should put in the notes to explore if you're open.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Just quick bounce back off of that because there was federal agreement to explore those for the tribes, and that federal agreement is now under question. So if the state, I don't know how that works, but if the state wanted to move into some of that space,
yeah,
it might be up.
And some of our Oregon members have noted that the feds had let tribes before to development projects that then failed. So the sort of the lack of trust, that there'd been a trust break there. And I think the opportunity could be pretty great for the state and, again, some sort of partnership consortia to make that happen. So.
So, can't see it now, it's up there. Remember if we have a next step slide, we want to talk about next steps and then just offer any reflections and space for Odo staff. If there's things you're hearing and just want to reflect back or comments.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So I have a next step slides. I'm going to do a quick reflection on some common themes that I'm hearing. I mean, energy efficiency loud and clear. And that's really powerful because I'm hearing energy efficiency kind of around the room. And I'm also hearing, Fred, what you said, which is that we've done really well, but we haven't done everything. We have a lot more that we can do. And I think that that's a really important message. I also hear a little bit of a message about prioritization or sequencing, like efficiency first came up. And we haven't prioritized. We've just kind of put everything in a, just same level and not said this needs to happen first or second. And so I guess that raises a question for us of whether there needs to be kind of a framing in that sense. A lot about the federal reality that we're in terms of changes in federal policy. Relating to that, I heard a comment about focusing on the near term. And I just want to emphasize that I think that the energy strategy, and we've said this, but I just want to emphasize this and reiterate it, that we are focused on the near term. So I think we're looking out kind of the next, what could we accomplish in the next 5 or 10 years, but really what could we act on over the next 4 years? And that happens to coincide with federal election cycles and with a lot of the uncertainty that we're facing now. And I don't think that this energy strategy will be effective if we don't tackle some of that head on and say, all right, what can we do? And that's a little different than what it might have been 3 months ago or 4 months ago. I don't know, where are we? We're in April. Anyway, last year. Also hearing a lot about interconnected region, and I think that that is something that we try to do on the analytical side. I think we need to continue to work on how we recognize that interconnectedness both between sectors and in terms of the connection of our energy system to the broader region and what regional cooperation looks like and what the role of the energy strategy is in that space. And devil is in the details. I also agree with that comment that's come up a lot. And so we are looking forward to digging more into the details. I haven't read the stickies, but I will say that I'm hoping that some of the stickies are also, Charity, I'm gonna call you out. I really appreciated the way that you were reacting to the stickies by just saying, this is not specific enough. This is what I would like to see. I think to the extent that you all have put up comments like that, I think those are really helpful. We put words out there so that you could react to the words. And I realize that puts us in an uncomfortable space, but we want to be in that space. And so if you haven't written something down that you on reflection, we'll share the slides with you that you would like to follow up with, please do. Because this is helping frame up kind of how we then come up with those specific recommendations. And I also thought it was a really good point about how we stitch it all together, because there is all of this, like if we wanted to draw the connections across the room, we just have like strings all across the room over our heads between these stickies. And so just saying that here's a recommendation and here are the 5 bullets under it doesn't really work. We're running into this on the analytical side internally as well, because you might have a solution that hits 3 or 4 of these areas. And so how do we represent that? Those are just a few reflections. I really appreciate all of your willingness to just jump in and engage with us on this. We're at a stage where we're really trying to put out there what we're thinking so that you're not guessing anymore, right? So I realize that you're still guessing on like, well, what are the specific policy actions? We're going to start talking about those next week in our working groups. We're working really hard to get to where we can have that conversation that we feel ready to have it. So we're going to continue to get more specific, but we really are trying to get away from you trying to anticipate and being able to respond and react. And that's how we co-create an energy strategy. So that's kind of that's the approach. And here are the next steps. So we have the working groups are meeting on April 30th. We have 4 working group meetings. There's a reason for that. I won't get into it, but they're happening in parallel with each other, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. We couldn't fit a 5th one in, so then we have our buildings working group meeting on May 7th. Some of you all are participating in the working groups, or your members or others from your organization. Anybody's welcome to listen into these meetings. They're open for anybody to listen in. And then there's kind of people who are in the working groups that there and are active in the chat, things like that. Our next meeting is on May 13th, and we will be getting into that. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh my God. Interagency steering group is meeting. So as you know, we're communicating with our agencies. We're having that meeting on the 13th, and then pretty shortly thereafter, we'll meet with you all again, and we're going to get even deeper into it, and we're going to work really hard on how we can structure that conversation to get the most out of it. I would be interested in whether you'd be willing to do one more in-person meeting. I just think these conversations are so much better in person. I think that would be I don't have another in-person kind of envision that we really need one, but I think the next one would be really valuable to do in person. So we'll reach out as soon as possible so that we can avoid, I think there was a little ambiguity. The WebEx invites don't allow us to add, it's going to be in person to them. So we're going to work on that so that we're really clear, but hopefully the emails got to you all because you're here. One way or the other, you heard about it. We have a final policy working group plenary meeting that comes after we all meet on May 15th. That's explicit. We want to make sure that we check in with our sister agency. We check in with you before we come back to the working groups and say, here's where we landed based on everything we heard in the working groups, our synthesis of that, and our subsequent conversations in other venues that we have. And then, as I said, we'll put out kind of the written recommendations that we land on in the end for another round of written comments at that point. And comment portal 5.9, what's that?
That's from meetings on the work groups. Comment.
Oh, okay. Sorry, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so the comment portal is open, always on our website. We're always looking for comments from your organizations, from people you interact with. With the meetings happening on 4:30 and 5/7, we'd love to, if you have any comments from those working group meetings that you hear, please provide those comments to the comment portal by May 9th. Then we will be coming with more information on the 15th to really dive into some of those policy discussions.
Yeah, so that's kind of after spillover, because you never get the full conversation at the amount of time allotted, so, thanks, Josh. The details were worked out. And then, we'll have, oh, right, we're organizing an info session in mid-June to, once we've kind of taken on that written feedback, we would like to kind of explain where we landed, given all of these iterations, so that we can say, here's where we landed on the policy recommendations, here's why, so we can just provide a venue where we speak to where we landed. So again, really appreciate you all being here, and yeah, thanks for dedicating your morning to talking about the energy strategy.
12:01. Everybody take your burr. If you want more burrs, you can take 2, 3, 5, and stuff.